of the world didn't have it until colonization started in the 15th century.
And it's the one blood type that is least likely to mutate or interact with other blood types.
Type O blood has puzzled scientists and indigenous communities alike for years, holding a place deep within the story of the Americas. This blood type carries the weight of ancient migrations, cultural identity, and untold histories. But recent discoveries have started to challenge everything we thought we knew about its origins. What hidden truths does Type O blood reveal about the people who have called these lands home for thousands of years? And how might this mystery reshape our understanding of indigenous heritage? Let's explore the secrets behind the mystery of Type O blood. The mystery inside our blood. Type O blood isn't only a medical term, it's a genetic mystery. Most of the world didn't even have much of it until colonization began in the 15th century. But deep in the Americas, long before any ships crossed the Atlantic, this blood type was already widespread. And it wasn't just common, it was dominant. Among many indigenous communities, up to 100% of people had Type O blood. It's a pattern so striking that scientists are still trying to make sense of it. What makes it even stranger is how stable this blood type is. Unlike others, Type O doesn't mutate much. It rarely interacts with other types in unexpected ways. It seems built for endurance. That genetic stubbornness might be why it's still around in such high numbers today, especially in the Americas. At the center of our biology is blood, but it does more than keep us alive. It also tells a long story about where we come from. Blood types, A, B, AB, and O, are defined by the antigens on our red blood cells. These antigens are basically surface markers made up of proteins and sugars. Type A has the A antigen, B has the B, AB has both, and O has none. Having no antigens makes Type O extremely useful in emergencies. Hospitals love it because it's the safest option when someone's blood type is unknown. It's called the universal donor for a reason. Now here's where it gets interesting. Among indigenous peoples in the Americas, Type O shows up in extreme numbers. It's not just a random trait. It may have helped them survive. Some scientists believe that Type O blood provides an edge against certain diseases. In places where illnesses like malaria were a threat, Type O might have helped people fight back. That theory fits better with patterns seen in Africa, but it still adds another layer to the bigger picture. Zooming out, blood type distribution across the world tells us a lot about human history. In some regions, Type A or B dominates, but in the Americas, especially in indigenous groups, Type O practically takes over. Why? One idea is that Type O blood may help the body deliver oxygen more efficiently, especially at higher altitudes. That would have been a major plus for early communities living in the mountains. Another factor is disease resistance. With no A or B antigens, Type O may have helped people avoid infections that attacked those proteins. Over thousands of years, these small advantages likely added up. Generation by generation, people with Type O blood had better odds of surviving and passing on their genes. The result is what we see today, a genetic pattern etched into the population. Tracking blood types is like tracing human movement across time. In Africa, where humans first evolved, Type O is common. As people spread into Europe and Asia, the balance shifted. Type A became more common in Western Europe, while Type B showed up more in Central and East Asia. But in the Americas, something different happened. People who crossed the land bridge from Siberia during the Ice Age probably brought mostly Type O with them. Once they arrived, they stayed isolated from the rest of the world until European contact thousands of years later. No new blood types came in, and Type O remained unchallenged. In some communities, it became the only blood type. reaching frequencies close to 100%. Compare that to the global average, which is around 62%, and the difference is dramatic. Looking beyond the Americas. When comparing type O's dominance in the Americas with other isolated populations around the world, a pattern emerges, but it's never quite the same. Remote Pacific islands and small secluded communities often have high levels of specific blood types due to their migration stories and long periods of separation. Still, the consistent presence of type O across the Americas stands apart. There's something unique about how it took hold across such a massive and diverse landscape. It pushes researchers to ask deeper questions. How did ancient humans adapt so thoroughly to new worlds? What did they face? And why did type O seem to offer something the others didn't? The story of type O blood travels alongside the earliest chapters of life in the Americas. It begins with the migration of ancient humans who crossed the Bering Land Bridge from Asia during the last ice age. These were not large crowds. They were small, mobile groups moving through some of the harshest conditions on Earth. And within them was the type O gene, passed from one generation to the next. A quiet but consistent genetic trait that survived every obstacle. Scientific studies have mapped this journey in detail. In the 1980s, a major study of Native American communities in Arizona found that 99% of participants had type O blood. That wasn't an isolated finding. From the snowy tundras of Canada to the warm, tangled forests of the Amazon, the same pattern appears. Different tribes, different environments, but one striking commonality. Almost everyone had type O. So what kept this blood type so dominant through time? Adaptation might be the answer. The lack of A and B antigens made type O simpler in structure. That could have reduced vulnerability to certain bacteria and viruses, particularly in unpredictable or hostile environments. It might have allowed people to respond better to food shortages, climate shifts, or infectious outbreaks. Those advantages would mean longer lives, more children, and more chances to pass on the type O gene. New breakthroughs in DNA science have made it possible to trace bloodlines and human migrations with surprising precision. These tools confirm what many researchers suspected for decades. Type O blood has deep roots in the Americas, reaching back to the earliest human settlers. But this isn't just an interesting detail for academic papers. It has real, urgent meaning today, especially in medicine and emergency care. In indigenous communities where type O is the most common blood type, its universal donor status makes it incredibly valuable. Hospitals and emergency teams rely on it for trauma care, surgeries, and situations where there's no time to determine a patient's blood type. But despite its value, the supply doesn't always meet the need. There are many areas where type O blood is desperately needed, but donations fall short. Type O blood continues to be a key part of modern medical treatment. It's especially critical during emergencies when doctors don't know the patient's blood type, but still need to perform a transfusion. Type O negative is unique. It doesn't trigger immune reactions in patients with different blood types, making it the safest option when time is short. Type O positive, though not universally compatible, still works for a wide range of patients. Because of these traits, both O positive and O negative blood types are often the first choice in disaster zones, military settings, and emergency rooms. The problem is that this demand can easily outpace supply. Health systems around the world constantly struggle to keep enough of it on hand. And that challenge keeps growing. As more people rely on emergency procedures and trauma care, the need for type O blood becomes even more urgent. But the more hospitals depend on it, the more likely they are to run into shortages. It's a delicate balance, meeting daily needs while also preparing for unexpected emergencies. Beyond transfusions. The impact of type O blood isn't limited to blood banks and hospitals. Its influence stretches into genetic research and public health. Studies suggest that people with type O blood might have a slightly lower risk for certain health problems, including heart disease. There's also evidence pointing to differences in how blood types respond to infections and viruses. This kind of information could reshape how doctors think about prevention and treatment. If blood type affects how someone fights off disease, then it could become a factor in how care is personalized in the future. But that also brings up difficult questions, like how to make sure people in all regions, including those with limited resources, get equal access to the care they need. Efforts to improve blood storage and distribution are underway, and there's growing interest in developing artificial blood products that could ease the burden on donors. Still, type O blood's natural ability to help in emergencies gives it a unique and irreplaceable role. That's unlikely to change anytime soon. Among scientists, there's long been curiosity about why type O blood is so dominant in Native American populations. One idea focuses on survival in extreme environments. High-altitude areas like the Andes pose real challenges: thin air, lower oxygen levels, and increased strain on the body. But for thousands of years, people have lived there, adapted, and thrived. What's striking is that many indigenous groups in these regions also have high levels of type O blood. That's led researchers to explore whether this blood type might have provided some sort of evolutionary advantage. One theory suggests that type O blood, being less viscous than other types, could flow more easily through the body. In places where oxygen is limited, smoother circulation could help tissues get the oxygen they need more efficiently. Living in high altitudes has never been easy. Cold weather, low oxygen, and tough terrain push the human body to its limits. Yet, indigenous communities have survived in these places for generations, and scientists think type O blood may have played a quiet but powerful role in that. One major reason lies in circulation. Type O blood tends to be thinner, which helps it move more easily through blood vessels. In high-altitude environments where oxygen is scarce, this smoother flow might help deliver oxygen to the body more efficiently. But survival isn't just about oxygen. It's also about staying healthy. Some research suggests that people with type O blood may have had better resistance to certain diseases. While malaria wasn't a serious threat in pre-Columbian America, the pattern is still useful. Pathogens often target the A and B antigens on red blood cells. Since type O lacks both, it might give people a slight edge in avoiding serious illness. Different regions meant different diets. From seafood-heavy meals in the Pacific Northwest to corn-based dishes in Central America, indigenous diets weren't one-size-fits-all. Still, some researchers suggest that blood type might influence how well a person processes certain foods. The connection between blood type and metabolism is still being studied, but it adds another layer to the story. Food was survival, and how well someone could absorb nutrients might have played a role in long-term health and reproduction. A social advantage hidden in the blood. In small, close-knit communities, helping others wasn't optional. It was part of survival. That's where blood type might have carried social weight. Type O individuals, being universal donors, would have been valuable during injuries, childbirth, or other emergencies. The ability to offer life-saving blood could boost someone's importance in the group. Some anthropologists even wonder if this could have influenced social roles or reproductive success over time. Still, it's important to stay cautious. There isn't one clear answer. The advantage of type O blood likely came from many different things: environmental challenges, disease exposure, diet, and social structures all working together. In the long and complicated story of human migration, deoxyribonucleic acid technology has become a powerful way to trace where people came from and how they moved across continents. In the case of Native American populations, DNA tests have revealed how common type O blood is and how deep those genetic roots go. But it's not just about charts and markers. For many people, especially indigenous descendants, this science makes old family stories feel real again. DNA doesn't just confirm ancestry, it strengthens identity. Many Native communities value their links to ancestors and land. Genetic tests now help reinforce those ties, especially for families who may have lost their records due to colonization. For some, like Leo Lapointe, these tests have brought history to life. As a direct relative of Sitting Bull, Leo used DNA to confirm his connection, a discovery that carried personal meaning and historical weight. Learning about Native ancestry through DNA isn't just about curiosity. It can become a way to reclaim identity, reconnect with culture, and participate in traditions that once felt distant. It also matters in real-world ways, like accessing rights or resources meant for Native peoples. When someone sees their ancestry confirmed through DNA, it can be the start of understanding how they belong in the wider Native community. Of course, all of this comes with questions. The use of genetic information brings up important issues about privacy, consent, and how that data will be used. While DNA technology offers powerful answers, it also requires careful thought and ethical responsibility. Still, for many, it's a meaningful way to reconnect with the past while understanding their place in the present. Understanding DNA results can be exciting, but when it comes to Native identity, things aren't that simple. For Indigenous communities, being Native isn't only about biology, it's about history, culture, community, and deep ties to land and ancestors. So, when commercial DNA testing companies treat Native heritage like just another trait to trace or sell, it raises serious concerns. The business side of DNA testing has turned genetic ancestry into a product, leading to tough questions about who controls this information, who benefits from it, and who has the right to use it. Some Native leaders argue that these tests risk oversimplifying Indigenous identity and ignoring tribal sovereignty. It's not enough to find a shared genetic marker. Without cultural knowledge, community ties, and recognition from the tribe itself, DNA alone doesn't tell the full story. And when companies profit off Native heritage without input from Native communities, it creates another layer of exploitation, this time in the name of science and technology. How ancient relatives reframe human history. Advances in DNA science have also changed how we understand our ancestors. Scientists can now track family trees with astonishing accuracy, uncovering how humans moved across the world and how ancient populations interacted with one another. The Denisovans, for example, are one of these long-lost groups. They were closely related to Neanderthals and Homo sapiens, but remained genetically distinct. In fact, they're often seen as a separate population, even though their DNA overlaps heavily with the others. The same goes for Neanderthals. For decades, they were portrayed as clumsy or primitive. But new genetic research has forced people to rethink that image. Neanderthals likely had strong survival skills, sharp intelligence, and complex communities. They weren't outsmarted into extinction. They simply existed alongside early Homo sapiens until about 40,000 years ago. Their decline didn't happen because they were inferior. Instead, it was part of a much more complex shift in human evolution. Modern humans didn't arrive and instantly replace everyone else. The story of Neanderthals and Denisovans isn't about one group winning and another losing. It's about interconnection. These populations lived, adapted, and possibly even cooperated in some regions. DNA samples from modern humans especially those with non-African ancestry, still show traces of Neanderthal and Denisovan genes. That means some form of interaction, possibly even interbreeding, helped shape who we are today. For a long time, Neanderthals were treated as the forgotten relatives of humanity, painted as dull, clumsy, and barely capable of survival. But recent discoveries have started to break down that tired narrative. Archaeologists have found signs that Neanderthals weren't just surviving, they were thriving. Caves once thought to be empty shelters turned out to have symbolic carvings, pigments, and handmade tools. These findings suggest they practiced a form of art, understood symbolism, and built tools with purpose. That's not something you expect from a so-called primitive species. Genetic studies add even more to the picture. Modern humans still carry small portions of Neanderthal DNA, meaning that there was interbreeding between our species and theirs. They didn't just vanish, they became part of us. This kind of genetic overlap hints at something more complex than competition. It suggests relationships, shared experiences, and possibly cooperation. Neanderthals weren't just side characters in our story. They helped write it. Crawford lives in Harb, Montana, deep within the massive stretch of the Blackfeet Indian Reservation. The place is vast, over 1.2 million acres in the state's northwest, and holds one of the largest native populations in the United States. There's another Blackfeet community across the border in Alberta, Canada. With strong roots in both countries, the Blackfeet Nation has carried its traditions for generations. But Crawford's story adds something unexpected to that history. Scientists at the Cellular Research Institute conducted a detailed DNA test on Crawford, and what they found shook up some long-held ideas about human migration. His genetic map was unusually deep, in fact, that it made researchers reconsider how and when humans arrived in the Americas. The current theory focuses on a migration from what is now northern Siberia, thousands of years ago. But Crawford's DNA pointed to something even older, something more layered, and something that didn't quite fit the timeline. For scientists, this wasn't just about one person's ancestry. It opened a new path of questions about how the earliest people reached this continent. If Crawford's genetic trail suggests a different route or a different timeline altogether, it could reshape the entire framework of early American history. And with his home located in such a culturally rich region, the research becomes even more meaningful. The Blackfeet Nation has always known the value of its heritage. Now, science is starting to catch up. Crawford's background is personal, but it also represents something bigger. His DNA has become part of a much wider exploration of native identity, origin, and resilience. As researchers dig deeper into his ancestry, they find traces that connect him not only to the land around him, but to migration stories that span continents and centuries. In doing so, they also draw attention to the Blackfeet community, a living, breathing population with generations of history that refuses to be simplified by genetics alone. Within that landscape, DNA doesn't just function as a scientific tool, it becomes a thread connecting memory, family, and place. The Blackfeet Nation holds on to its traditions and history, even as the world tries to define identity through charts and lab results. Crawford's test didn't just help science, it brought more attention to the complexity and strength of Indigenous identity, one that doesn't need validation from machines to prove it exists. The stranger and the blood mystery. Among the many unanswered questions in Indigenous genetic research is the mystery of type O blood. It appears occasionally in certain families among native communities, but its origins have long remained unclear. Scientists have studied this for years, trying to understand how it appeared and why. Yet, the scientific view only tells part of the story. Tribal stories offer a different perspective, one that is less clinical and more curious, weaving history with myth. Some elders spoke of a pale traveler who arrived long ago. He had blue eyes, light skin, and no known family. People weren't sure if he was lost or sent from another place entirely. His presence didn't cause panic, but it did stir something deep in the community. Around the time he appeared, so did traces of type O blood. As generations passed, the story of this stranger blended into the larger history of the tribe, becoming part of their identity and oral tradition. For some, he was a symbol of change, an arrival of something new that shifted their world in subtle ways. Others weren't so sure. They worried his descendants might bring misfortune, though no one could explain why. Over time, the details of the story faded, but the questions remained. Where did he really come from? Why did the blood change after he arrived? Could he have been a lone traveler from a distant land, or even a survivor of an ancient migration forgotten by history? Even with today's advanced technology and genetic testing, some mysteries still lie just beyond the edge of science. They are wrapped in legend, memory, and the silence of time, reminding us that history isn't always written in textbooks or DNA alone, but also in stories passed down through generations. To uncover these deeper layers of human history, researchers have looked far beyond the Americas, all the way to Lake Baikal in Siberia. This ancient lake isn't just the world's oldest and deepest freshwater lake. It's also one of the earliest genetic crossroads in human history. For thousands of years, it served as a meeting ground for people from the East and West, long before recorded history even began. Genetic connections made near Lake Baikal date all the way back to the Paleolithic era and stretched into the Bronze Age. Some scientists believe these ancient Siberians could be the ancestors of Native Americans. That idea fits with the long-held theory that the first Americans crossed a land bridge from Siberia to Alaska. But this isn't a universal belief. In a National Geographic piece from June 2018, author Simon Worrall explored the idea that humans may have taken very different routes. He questioned whether they walked across the Bering Strait, traveled down the Kelp Highway by boat, or maybe even crossed the Atlantic via ice caps. He also noted that native traditions, like those of the Navajo, believe that their ancestors were always in the Americas, never migrants at all. These contrasting ideas point to just how open-ended the story of human migration still is. Baikal isn't only important for its role in human history, it's an ecological marvel, home to plant and animal species found nowhere else on the planet. For over 20 million years, this lake has seen massive geological shifts and environmental changes. But even more importantly, it's watched generations of humans grow, adapt, and interact on its shores. Archaeological finds suggest people have been living there for about 500,000 years. These early humans used the lake's resources for food and shelter. Eventually, the area evolved into a key point for trade. Groups passed through, carrying not just goods, but languages, ideas, and bloodlines. Over time, Lake Baikal became more than a resource. It became a boundary that people crossed, a place where DNA mixed. This exchange left lasting traces in the genes of surrounding populations. Today, scientists are still uncovering how these connections may link ancient Siberians to the early people of the Americas. Some continue to support the land bridge theory, while others push for less traditional explanations. Migration isn't a straight line. It's a tangled web full of surprises. And, as Simon Worrall reports, we're still far from understanding it all. Polynesian and Native American connection. There's another story researchers are just beginning to understand: the ancient connection between Native Americans and Polynesians. Around 800 years ago, people from these two distant worlds seem to have met, across the open ocean. Recent studies show Native American DNA in the genetics of several Polynesian populations today. This suggests a real historical encounter, not just a passing theory. Unlike the more famous narratives of European contact, this part of history gets far less attention. Yet evidence has been building. For years, researchers pointed to New World crops like sweet potatoes and bottle gourds found in Polynesian sites, plants that didn't exist outside the Americas at that time. Skeptics pushed back, arguing the samples weren't enough. But now, thanks to more advanced genetic testing, scientists have found clear DNA links between the two groups. The story goes deeper. Genetic segments traced back to Native Americans were found across multiple Polynesian islands. Statistical modeling placed the DNA's origin in modern-day Colombia. This likely involved intermarriage and children born with a mixed heritage. Researchers believe this took place during the first wave of Polynesian island settlements, suggesting early explorers may have sailed farther and connected with more people than previously imagined. While the story of Type O blood in Native Americans is deeply tied to migration, mystery, and ancestral blending, the blood type itself has a strange global history. Type O isn't just a Native American trait. It's also the most common blood type in the world. But here's where it gets odd. Its distribution doesn't follow any neat pattern. In places like South and Central America, nearly 100% of indigenous populations have Type O blood. But if you go east to Asia or west to Europe, the numbers drop sharply. This sudden spike in the Americas raises one obvious question. Why is Type O so dominant among Native American groups? Some researchers suggest it could be a result of the founder effect. When a small group of people breaks away and forms a new population, any rare traits they carry can become extremely common, simply because there's less genetic diversity. If the first humans to settle in the Americas happened to have a higher rate of Type O blood, that could explain its spread. But even this theory has its gaps, because the percentages in indigenous populations are sometimes too high to be explained by chance alone. Another strange thing about Type O blood is its link to disease. People with Type O blood seem to have some protection against certain illnesses, like malaria or severe COVID-19 complications, but might be more vulnerable to others, like ulcers or cholera. In ancient times, this could have made Type O carriers more likely to survive specific outbreaks, while others didn't. Some researchers believe that over thousands of years, communities hit by certain diseases may have seen Type O become more common through natural selection. So in regions like the Americas, where environmental and disease pressures were different from the rest of the world, this blood type may have offered a survival edge. In that case, it wasn't just inherited, it was favored. Type O blood is also considered the oldest blood type in human evolution. Some scientists believe it was the original blood group for all humans before mutations eventually produced types A, B, and AB. This means that ancient populations, especially isolated ones, could have kept Type O almost entirely intact, while others gradually evolved more variation. That theory would fit well with the idea that early Native Americans descended from a relatively small, genetically unique group that carried Type O in its most ancient form. And yet, there's no final answer. But whatever the truth is, it's clear that Type O blood isn't just a biological label. It's a clue left behind in the veins of modern people that points back to ancient migrations. Type O blood is a mystery that crosses oceans and centuries. Recent discoveries connect it to ancient migrations and surprising links between distant peoples. This blood type reveals a story far more complex than we imagined, with many secrets still hidden. What do you think is the most surprising part of the Type O blood story? Let us know in the comments.